All right. Happy Valentine's Day. Today is Friday, February 14th, and yes, it is another round of the Edgar Poe class. Uh, it is your favorite candidate here in the Bronx, here kicking it off as usual with my thoughts for the week before we pass things off to Dennis Speed, who will be leading us with another story in the Bronx. There's a lot to talk about. The first thing I guess I want to talk about is what happened today with Naledi Pandor. Um, this is the woman who brought the case to the International Criminal Court against Israel. And she was on the Schiller Institute platform today on the International Peace Call. Um, and there, I mean, she just gave a ringing endorsement of the Oasis plan and said that this right there is something that the Oasis plan is something that actually addresses a lot of issues beyond just the ongoing crisis that's happening in the region, but actually can lead to a sustainable, durable future for everyone in the region. I was actually thoroughly impressed myself that that had happened and that she had actually said that. And what ensued was a great dialogue, and the entire call was elevated, and a lot of people were really happy to have been able to talk with somebody of her stature. Helga Zepp LaRouche kept being referred to as Dr. LaRouche. And for those of you who actually got into the Zoom and were a part of the discussion that wasn't live streamed, you would have seen more examples of that happening. Um, so that happened today, and that's of course coming off the heels of this Munich Security Council that took place, where JD Vance is currently in Europe tearing things apart right now, completely denouncing Romania, denouncing the EU, and saying that they are not um, supporting free speech, that they're suppressing free speech, that they're not handling their migrant crisis very well. Uh, yeah, and all this with the backdrop of there are currently negotiations happening as we speak, most likely between the United States and Russia. And today, Trump confirmed that Zelensky is not involved in those discussions, and they're just going to have to do whatever is agreed upon between Russia and the United States. Now, that's a pretty crazy thing to happen and to say, but that is the reality of the situation right now. Lindsey Graham was also in Ukraine as well, saying that he hopes that Trump will come up with a solution for this war that would make it so that if Putin were to invade Ukraine again, it would be quote unquote foolish. Now, I don't know exactly why Lindsey Graham is there. He was one of the more staunch supporters of Ukraine. So we are a little fearful about that. But we also know we got some intelligence from our friend Garland Nixon, who did a live show just a few days ago, just like the day before the Munich Security Council, I think, met, where he was going through who the peace envoy was in Ukraine. And there's this guy named Kellogg. And if you were reading the headlines in the last earlier in the week, you would have seen that Kellogg was saying he wanted to stop the peace deals and get a sense for what NATO and the EU want to do. Well, suddenly a call happens between Putin and Trump, and then then Trump names his team of people who are actually going to go over to the region to discuss this peace plan. One of them, of course, was Hegseth. The other one was John Ratcliffe of the CIA, and I don't remember. Oh, and Marco Rubio. But this guy Kellogg's name was notably omitted. Now, our friend Garland Nixon did some research and did a public live stream where he went through who exactly this Kellogg guy was. And it turns out that Kellogg's daughter is the president of an NGO that was founded specifically to give tons of aid to Ukraine and to lobby the Senate to make sure that Ukraine could have all the aid it needed. So this comes out, and then not even 24 to 48 hours later, the Kellogg guy is notably missing from these peace talks. Now, I don't exactly know what this means one way or the other, whether or not this had a direct correlation or an effect. All I know is that the story did, in fact, come out. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is Tulsi Gabbard. She has been confirmed as the director of national intelligence. A lot of you have been seeing my efforts where I endorsed her as for somebody to be in that position of DNI. And it was quite an explosive week. As some of you know, I was sitting in the hearing as it happened live. I was down in Washington, D.C. I can understand the hesitancy of a lot of people. I saw some of my friends on social media saying that they hope that Tulsi will prove them wrong. Well, frankly, I think that's a hope that we can all share. We want to see accountability and truth come out. Now, frankly, I think a lot of the reason why this was able to happen was because of an intervention that we did. And if you've been following along with the Poe classes, you know that we've been going down to DC frequently. We went down, I think 2 or 3 times, I think, giving out this pamphlet called The Liars Bureau. I talked a little bit about this on the Whiners a couple weeks ago as well, where we gave every Senate office a list of people who did not want to see Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel confirmed for the Senate confirmations or the Senate positions that they were supposed to take. Um, and we had people from all parts of the country, from North Carolina who drove 6 hours north, from New York City who drove about 4 to 4.5 hours to Washington, D.C., just to come in and lobby and just say, look, we think that these people like Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and others, the worst of the swamp, are advocating for her not to be DNI, is exactly why she should be in that position of power. And now we're seeing an oversight committee where being held by Anna Paulina, who is saying that they're going to declassify the Epstein client list and that they're going to also declassify 14,000 new files that have appeared in the Kennedy assassinations that weren't known to exist previously. Well, that's quite odd that they weren't known to exist previously, but it's good that these things are being declassified. And as we know in the executive order, the person overseeing all this is the Director of National Intelligence. So more is yet to be seen as to what exactly will happen. But overall, what I would tell people is that the reason why some of these good things are happening is because of our interventions. And the reason why the bad things are happening, like this stupid plan from Trump to just own Gaza, is because we aren't doing enough. And that's why what we did today with Naledi Pandor, that's why our efforts to get the Oasis plan is our intervention against inane plans and an attempt to get something worthwhile going to develop sustaining peace and development in the region. The Oasis plan is the best way that we know of right now to make sure that war cannot break out in that region again if that plan is followed through, developed on, and understood by world leaders around the world. And that is a job every single human being must do now. And so with that, I'm going to end my opening remarks there, and I'm going to pass it off to Dennis Speed, who does our weekly Poe class. So he's going to be sitting where I am. So go ahead, Dennis.
So, well, this is a day and a time where it's people will find it useful, productive to challenge assumptions that will get challenged anyway. Things that you believe will be said or done by certain people will be done by others. The people that you think you should trust, you will come to not trust. That may include yourself because of the kind of things that are about to occur and have begun to occur. And I'm not talking about the political realm. It is in the political realm, but it's in the political realm only as the footprint of a fundamental change that has happened. These changes occur, and there are laws to them, but they don't occur in the way that people prefer. There is an author, economist of the late 19th, early 20th century, Rosa Luxemburg, wrote a pamphlet called "The Mass Strike, the Political Party, and the Trade Union." One of the things she does is to take a look at the phenomena of social movements and the way in which these manifest themselves. And she talks about something called the mass strike. She emphasizes that anybody that ever tries to call a mass strike is always thwarted. People who think that you can create a movement that can call a mass strike are fools. Cannot be done. But it's a process that grips a society at a certain point. It does have catalysts. But at the point that the process is catalyzed, it turns into something other than the particular trigger. References something other than the particular trigger that causes it, or seems to cause it, because the trigger doesn't cause it. In the same way that people will tell many stories about what happened in 1989 to cause ultimately the Berlin Wall to fall, no one who is not a fool can point to any organization or grouping of people that caused those events. There are many people that participated in the events. There are people that anticipated the events. For example, the economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche described a crisis that was erupting. Actually, was sort of slowly simmering initially from the early 1980s inside of the then Soviet Union, which would result in the unification of Germany. And he asserted that that's something that should occur. He did that in 1988 on Columbus Day, October 12th, at the Kempinski Hotel in Berlin. But what then happened the next year, within the year of what he said, was not anticipated by anyone in the way in which it occurred. So is that phenomenon real? Well, the expression is clearly real, but then when you try to grab it, when you try to control it, when you try to hold it, you find you can't. So this is an expression of a kind of phenomenon that the world is right now undergoing. And there are various people who suddenly may find themselves speaking on its behalf without themselves understanding what they're saying, or even, for that matter, having agreement with it. You have the fact that some rationality actually came out of Hegseth, speaking prior, really, to the opening of the Munich conference, in which he made it very clear to Europe, you really don't have a lot to say about what the president of the United States is going to discuss with the president of Russia. Europe felt quite slighted, quite incensed by that. But what he said is true. And it was true because the process that they claim that they think they should have something to say about, they've lied about for the past 3 years. Now, they thought they were doing that at the behest of the United States, Washington, and London. But there was more to it than that. And of course, there was a certain benefit they thought they were going to gain, various of these countries. And now they find they have nothing to say. But they have nothing to say because the actual circumstance in Ukraine is that Russia won the war months ago. They had actually implicitly won the war by April of 2022, but the Ukrainians were directed to continue to fight. And Boris Johnson did that. Well, he was the announcer for it. He was the messenger. He wasn't the architect of the policy. Former Prime Minister of England. And what this shows is that though it is often believed that truth gets crushed, and it does, it always rises again. Today, Naledi Pandor, in her remarks, made it clear that sometimes you were hearing ideas which are simply utterly absurd, and her problem is how do you respond to an idea which is absurd in a serious manner that elevates not the absurd idea, but the speaker of the idea. For example, she said it will be a simple physical impossibility to move the Palestinians, but not because you don't have enough trucks. and not because people can't get to the subway, but because they will not move without all being killed. And that there is a misestimation of the people there. And it's not a matter of the fact they're all going to pick up guns. No, even if you killed them all, you couldn't kill them all, because they have a different connection, not merely to, quote, the land, but to something which is the culture, the spirit of their culture. You can't kill that any more than you could ultimately kill all of the Jews, which of course the Nazis tried to do in the 1933 through 45 period, and instead eliminated themselves as a result of that. There are things that you cannot, there are crimes that people attempted to commit, but the very attempt to commit the crime ultimately destroys the people that perpetrate that. The fact that people believe that to be a hope, an aspiration, as opposed to a law, doesn't obviate the law. And Naledi Pandor was eloquent on that today, as was Helga Sepp-LaRouche, who insisted that her 10 principles, which are not policies, not programs, and they're not sound bites, are the necessary precondition for a dialogue about what needs to be done. I think it's important to just think about that. To start us tonight, we're going to read a particular story of Poe's, which it wasn't picked for Valentine's Day, but it was picked because it does discuss immortality. And of course, the person, Valentine, if you presume him to have existed, there's reasons to think he did. He was a Christian evangelist and the head of a church who was incarcerated by Rome for performing marriages and certain other activities, wrote from jail in the same way that Paul wrote, though Paul was not imprisoned all of the time. Paul was often in prison, but he didn't write all of his epistles from there. But Valentine's letters came to his church, and the church, not a building, it was a group of people who were called the church. And he signed these, if you believe the legend, your Valentine. That's where it comes from. He was tortured. He was killed. There's a probably apocryphal story, but it might not be given the Romans' mentality, that his heart was delivered to his loved ones, which is where the tradition, it's said, of the Valentine's candy in the form of a heart comes from. It's important to understand that Valentine is another expression of this process of the cost of discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others are the people that represent this. There are many of these persons in the early Christian church, and in the later Christian church as well, like St. Thomas More, for example, or others that have taken those actions on behalf of people. What I want to do is, just from the standpoint of having said those things, it's very intense, right? This situation is very sort of, you're talking about 1.8 million people that could be wiped out arbitrarily. You're talking about whether or not China, Russia, and the United States are going to sit down to try to end a war in Ukraine where other millions have died. How do you approach these things? What's the point of reading stories in the middle of something like that? So I want to start with something which is a way of posing this. There is a young man by the name of Felix Mendelssohn. He was a musician in the 19th century. He was a child prodigy. He wrote many pieces at a very young age, particularly a remarkable octet in E flat major. He was 13 years old, which has elements and effectively sort of pays homage to the late string quartets of Beethoven. He was Jewish and was responsible, together with others, for reviving J.S. Bach and making Bach better known in a concert that he did in 1829, performing a piece that had been lost, or had never been performed, rather. It hadn't really been lost because people had actually preserved it, others, Abraham Kessner and others. But it had not been performed for about 100 years. And he performed it with a group of his friends, 1829. It caused great reaction, positive and negative. It could be argued, I think persuasively, that Felix Mendelssohn, because of his ethnicity, was gone after, but it was gone after because of his resurrection of Bach, particularly by Richard Wagner, who, whenever he might perform Mendelssohn, made sure to always wear white gloves. And at the end of whatever piece he might have performed by him, to take off the gloves and throw them on the ground. He wrote an essay called On Judaism and Music. You should take a look at it sometime, just to understand the actual roots of the way in which the campaign against the Jewish population in Germany was conducted. Because without the Jewish population of Germany, Moses Mendelssohn and his grandson Felix, and the sister also Fanny, who is also a composer, many of whose works I think have really just been finally actually made known between approximately 2010 and 2014. It's been a project to make a lot of these known. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start not by playing the full, but by playing two versions of the beginning of Felix Mendelssohn's A Midsummer Night's Dream. He wrote this when he was 16 years old. And I think it's important to listen to the entire piece. We're not going to do that tonight. I invite people to do that. We can give you links to these individual sections. But whenever I hear this piece, it strikes me that it captures everything about genius, youth, and great culture. I think it's important to think about that as you think about the prospect of solving the crisis in Southwest Asia and what exists as a potential to bring to that discussion, which is being either not merely denied, but being in effect discarded by at least those that represent the institutions of the nation of Israel. We're going to play this. What we're going to do is we're going to play two versions. The first one is about 1 minute and 30 seconds. We're just playing the beginning. And it's Claudio Abbado, I believe, is the conductor, and London Philharmonic, I think. So we're going to play that version. We're going to go right to a second version, which will be Wilhelm Furtwängler. I'll say a little bit about the second one at the conclusion. So the first one is about 1.5 minutes. The second is just under 2 minutes. Same exact passage.
Dennis, can you click off the mic when?
Oh, you mean this right here?
No. It's just mute him on your end. But it's not. It won't.
It's not going to feedback.
No. But if it does, just mute him on your laptop.
Okay.
That's fine. That's fine. That's okay. So this was the second version. Same exact passage. Wilhelm Furtwängler, 1947. Okay. Same exact passage, but very different.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to talk about the difference. I want to just I think people heard the difference. Am I right? Yeah. Whatever you thought of either. Huh?
It was almost like a different piece.
Does other people have that reaction, or what? I don't want to. It's okay. If we maybe, you know what? Maybe what we should do is, if you have responses to it, let's talk about that. I would just say that the fact that you can have two people read something so differently tells you that there's something in the fabric, if you want to put it of the idea, that's in the music, that allows that to occur. That there's a freedom in not the notes, but the fabric. And the fabric's not on the page. So it's alive in some way, that the notes indicate what it is, but the notes are not what it is. And maybe even the instruments are not where it is. Okay, so the story for tonight, which is called Mesmeric Revelation, to set this up, we're going to get started on it. But basically, there's been this discussion that had gone on for quite a while, actually, by the time that Poe wrote the story. It's written approximately, was about 1844, I think, if I'm not mistaken, thereabouts. Poe would have been about 35 years old. Yeah, August of 1844 is when it's first published. It was probably begun somewhat before then. And so from about the 1780s, so for about 50 plus years, let's just put it that way, there'd been this discussion about animal magnetism, called, mesmerism. It's named after a man by the name of Franz Mesmer, who he was a German doctor, and he had talked about this idea of a natural force that all living things had, with animals, humans, vegetables, and this force could be a healing force. So there was a whole sort of interest in whether or not there were people that were able to bring this force to bear, and could you use things like hypnotism to allow the mind to relax in such a fashion that you could call forth this magnetic or healing force. So there's a whole interest in this. Now Poe actually didn't think a whole lot about this. I mean, there were a lot of things written. There were hundreds of books that were written about it over the course of that 60, 70, 80-year period. So like with many things that Poe wrote, he would take up something that he knew was popular and then do something with it. So the story names different people. And if I have to, I'll stop here or there and just reference a couple of those things. People have read these stories all know that Poe is often referencing things that we then sometimes stop and talk about. But I want to get us started on the body of the story. And I'll begin, and I may ask for a second reader for the first part, but we have three people that are prepared, and that's Jose and Kynan and Robert. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's who's doing it? Okay, great. So this is the story. I guess it's up there now. Great. So let me just start us off. And I want people to know that Poe's taking the occasion. He's sort of almost doing a variation on a theme, or taking a theme and doing something with it, which it goes way beyond the particulars of what I just said. So here's our story. Mesmeric Revelation. Whatever doubt may still envelop the rationale of mesmerism, its startling facts are now almost universally admitted. Of these latter, those who doubt are your mere doubters by profession, an unprofitable and disreputable tribe. There can be no more absolute waste of time than the attempt to prove at the present day that man, by mere exercise of will, can so impress his fellow as to cast him into an abnormal condition, whose phenomena resemble very closely those of death, or at least resemble them more nearly than they do the phenomena of any other normal condition within our cognizance. That while in this state, the person so impressed employs only with effort and then feebly the external organs of sense, yet perceives with keenly refined perception and through channels supposed unknown, matters beyond the scope of the physical organs. That, moreover, his intellectual faculties are wonderfully exalted and invigorated, that his sympathies with the person so impressing him are profound, and finally, that his susceptibility to the impression increases with its frequency, while in the same proportion, the peculiar phenomena elicited are more extended and more pronounced. I say that these, which are the laws of mesmerism in its general features, it would be supererogation to demonstrate, nor shall I inflict upon my readers so needless a demonstration today. My purpose at present is a very different one indeed. I am impelled, even in the teeth of a world of prejudice, to detail without comment the very remarkable substance of a colloquy occurring not many days ago between a sleep-waker and myself. Let me simply say, sleep-waker is not a sleepwalker. Poe was very adamant that he wanted to make sure people understood that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about someone who is in a state in which they are fully conscious, but they are not, quote, there in the normal sense. So it's not like somebody who's sleepwalking. There is a relationship in the sense that perhaps you can address somebody who's sleepwalking, but this is a different phenomenon. I had been long in the habit of mesmerizing the person in question, Mr. Van Kirk, just to be, or you could also say Mr. Van Kirk, because his name means of a church. Mr. Van Kirk, and the usual acute susceptibility and exaltation of the mesmeric perception had supervened. For many months, he had been laboring under confirmed phthisis, the more distressing effects of which had been relieved by my manipulations. And on the night of Wednesday, the 15th instant, I was summoned to his bedside. The invalid was suffering with acute pain in the region of the heart and breathed with great difficulty having all the ordinary symptoms of asthma. In spasms such as these, he had usually found relief from the application of mustard to the nervous centers, but tonight this had been attempted in vain. As I entered his room, he greeted me with a cheerful smile, and although evidently in much bodily pain, appeared to be mentally quite at ease.
I sent for you tonight,
He said,
not so much to administer to my bodily ailment as to satisfy me concerning certain psychical impressions which, of late, have occasioned me much anxiety and surprise. I need not tell you how skeptical I have hitherto been on the topic of the soul's immortality. I cannot deny that there has always existed, as if in that very soul which I have been denying, a vague half-sentiment of its own existence. But this half-sentiment at no time amounted to conviction. With it my reason had nothing to do. All attempts at logical inquiry resulted, indeed, in leaving me more skeptical than before. I had been advised to study Cousin. I studied him in his own works as well as in those of his European and American echoes. The Charles Elwood of Mr. Brownson, for example, was placed in my hands. I read it with profound attention. Throughout, I found it logical, but the portions were not merely logical, or unhappily the initial arguments of the disbelieving hero of the book. In his summing up, it seemed evident to me that the reasoner had not even succeeded in convincing himself. His end had plainly forgotten his beginning, like the government of Trinculo. In short, I was not long in perceiving that if man is so to be intellectually convinced of his own immortality, he will never be so convinced by the mere abstractions which have been so long the fashion of the moralists of England, of France, and of Germany. Abstractions may amuse and exercise, but take no hold on the mind. Here upon earth, at least philosophy, I am persuaded, will always in vain call upon us to look upon qualities as things. The will may assent, the soul, the intellect, never.
hold on for a minute. I just want to let people know. So Charles Elwood refers to a novel called Charles Elwood or the Infidel Converted. It's about a man who's an atheist, Charles Elwood, and he's convinced there's no God. And then his life takes a turn. He meets a group of Christians. They challenge his beliefs and so on. And there's a series of conversations with him. So that's what he's referring to when he talks about the Charles Elwood of Browson, I think he said. Yeah, Mr. Browson. Then the second reference to our cousin, I think it was. You just make sure made a note about this. He was so he's a French author. He was an expert on Plato. He was a translator of Plato, I should say, and other things. So Poe is referring to his Philosophical Fragments, which is a book he had written. It was very popular at the time, so people knew what he was referring to. And many of these you'll see as the matters we're going to be discussing. So there's two references I'll make, and then Trinculo is just a reference to the Tempest, the character in the Tempest. I think he's one of the two sailors that gets drunk, and he's talking about creating his own republic. And as he said, the end forgot the beginning because the guy's drunk. So, okay, go ahead.
I repeat then that I only half felt and never intellectually believed. But latterly there has been a certain deepening of the feeling until it has come so nearly to resemble the acquiescence of reason that I find it difficult to distinguish between the two. I am enabled, too, plainly to trace this effect to the mesmeric influence. I cannot better explain my meaning than by the hypothesis that the mesmeric exaltation enables me to perceive a train of ratiocination, which, in my abnormal existence, convinces, but which, in full accordance with the mesmeric phenomena, does not extend, except through its effect, into my normal condition. In sleep-waking, the reasoning and its conclusion, the cause and its effect, are present together. In my natural state, the cause vanishing, the effect only, and perhaps only partially, remains. These considerations had led me to think that some good results might ensue from a series of well-directed questions propounded to me while mesmerized. You have often observed the profound self-cognizance evinced by the sleepwaker, the extensive knowledge he displays upon all points relating to the mesmeric condition itself, and from this self-cognizance may be deduced hints for the proper conduct of a catechism.
I consented, of course, to make this experiment. A few passes threw Mr. Van Kirk into the mesmeric sleep. His breathing became immediately more easy, and he seemed to suffer no physical uneasiness. The following conversation then ensued. V in the dialogue representing Mr. Van Kirk and P myself. What we're going to do now is have two people read. You want to take this chair, Kynan?
Sure.
Take that one, and then can Robert, can you, I don't know if you can, that's okay, I guess they don't have to.
Yeah.
Great.
Wait, how does that work?
I can do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I went too far.
Too far. That's pretty good.
Are you asleep?
Yes. No. I would rather sleep more soundly.
Do you sleep now?
Yes.
How do you think your present illness will result? This is you.
That
After a long hesitation and speaking as if with effort,
I must die.
Does the idea of death afflict you?
very quickly.
No, no.
Are you pleased with the prospect?
If I were awake, I should like to die, but now it is no matter. The mesmeric condition is so near death as to content me.
I wish you would explain yourself, Mr. Van Kirk.
I'm willing to do so, but it requires more effort than I feel able to make. You do not question me properly.
What then shall I ask?
You must begin at the beginning.
The beginning? But where is the beginning?
You know that the beginning is God.
This was said in a low, fluctuating tone and with every sign of the most profound veneration.
What then is God?
Hesitating for many minutes.
I cannot tell.
Is not God spirit?
While I was awake, I knew what you meant by spirit, but now it seems only a word, such, for instance, as truth, beauty, a quality, I mean.
Is not God immaterial?
There is no immateriality. It is a mere word. That which is not matter is not at all, unless qualities are things.
Is God then material?
No,
This reply startled me very much.
What then is he?
After a long pause and muttering,
I see. But it is a thing difficult to tell.
another long pause.
He is not spirit, for he exists, nor is he matter, as you understand it. But there are gradations of matter of which man knows nothing, the grosser impelling the finer pervading the grosser. The atmosphere, for example, impels the electric principle, while the electric principle permeates the atmosphere. These gradations of matter increase in rarity or fineness until we arrive at a matter unparticled, without particles, indivisible. One in here, the law of impulsion and permeation is modified. The ultimate or unparticled matter not only permeates all things, but impels all things, and thus is all things within itself. This matter is God. What men attempt to embody in the word thought is this matter in motion.
The metaphysicians maintain that all action is reducible to motion and thinking, and that the latter is the origin of the former.
Yes, and I now see the confusion of idea. Motion is the action of mind, not of thinking. The unparticled matter, or God, in quiescence, is, as nearly as we can conceive it, what men call mind. and the power of self-movement, equivalent in effect to human volition, is, in the unparticled matter, the result of its unity and omniprevalence. How I know not, and now clearly see that I shall never know. But the unparticled matter, set in motion by a law or quality existing within itself, is thinking.
Can you give me no more precise idea of what you term the unparticled matter?
The matters of which man is cognizant, except the senses in gradation. We have, for example, a metal, a piece of wood, a drop of water, the atmosphere, a gas, a caloric, electricity, the luminiferous ether. Now we call all these things matter and embrace all matter in one general definition. But in spite of this, there can be no ideas more essentially distinct than that which we attach to a metal and that which we attach to the luminiferous ether. When we reach the latter, we feel an almost irresistible inclination to class it with spirit or with nihility.
In nothingness. What he said.
Nothingness, yeah. The only consideration which restrains us is our conception of its atomic constitution. And here, even, we have to seek aid from our notion of an atom as something possessing an infinite minuteness, solidity, palpability, weight. Destroy the idea of the atomic constitution, and we should no longer be able to regard the ether as an entity, or at least as matter. For want of a better word, we might term it spirit. Take now a step beyond the luminiferous ether. Conceive a matter as much more rare than the ether, as this ether is more rare than the metal. And we arrive at once, in spite of all the school dogmas, at a unique mass, an unparticled matter. For although we may admit infinite littleness in the atoms themselves, the infinitude of littleness in the spaces between them is an absurdity. There will be a point, there will be a degree of rarity at which, if the atoms are sufficiently numerous, the interspaces must vanish and the mass absolutely coalesce. But the consideration of the atomic constitution being now taken away, the nature of the mass inevitably glides into what we conceive of spirit. It is clear, however, that it is as fully matter as before. The truth is, it is impossible to conceive spirit, since it is impossible to imagine what is not. When we flatter ourselves that we have formed its conception, we have merely deceived our understanding by the consideration of infinitely rarefied matter.
There seems to me an insurmountable objection to the idea of absolute coalescence, and that is the very slight resistance experienced by the heavenly bodies in their revolutions through space, a resistance now ascertained, it is true, to exist in some degree, but which is, nevertheless, so slight as to have been quite overlooked by the sagacity even of Newton. We know that the resistance of bodies is chiefly in proportion to their density. Absolute coalescence is absolute density. Where there are no interspaces, there can be no yielding. An ether, absolutely dense, would put an infinitely more effectual stop to the progress of a star than would an ether of adamant or of iron.
Your objection is answered with an ease which is nearly in the ratio of its apparent unanswerability. As regards the progress of the star, it can make no difference whether the star passes through the ether or the ether through it. There is no astronomical error more unaccountable than that which reconciles the known retardation of the comets with the idea of their passage through an ether. For, however rare this ether be supposed, it would put a stop to all sidereal revolution in a very far briefer period than has been admitted by those astronomers who have endeavored to slur over a point which they found it impossible to comprehend. The retardation actually experienced is, on the other hand, about that which might be expected from the friction of the ether in the instantaneous passage through the orb. In the one case, the retarding force is momentary and complete within itself. In the other, it is endlessly accumulative.
But in all this, in this identification of mere matter with God, is there nothing of irreverence?
How's that?
Oh, sorry. I was forced to repeat this question before the sleepwaker fully comprehended my meaning.
Can you say why matter should be less reverence than mind? But you forget that the matter of which I speak is, in all respects, the very mind or spirit of the schools, so far as regards its high capacities, and is, moreover, the matter of these schools at the same time. God, with all the powers attributed to spirit, is but the perfection of matter.
You assert then that the unparticled matter in motion is thought.
In general, this motion is the universal thought of the universal mind. This thought creates. All created things are but the thoughts of God.
You say in general.
Yes, the universal mind is God. For new individualities, matter is necessary.
But you now speak of mind and matter, as do the metaphysicians.
Yes, to avoid confusion. When I say mind, I mean the unparticled or ultimate matter. By matter, I intend all else.
You were saying that for new individualities, matter is necessary?
Yes, for mind, existing unincorporate is merely God. To create individual, thinking beings, it was necessary to incarnate portions of the divine mind. Thus, man is individualized. Divested of corporate investiture, he were God. Now, the particular motion of the incarnated portions of the unparticled matter is the thought of man, as the motion of the whole is that of God.
You say that divested of the body, man will be God.
After much hesitation.
I could not have said this. It is an absurdity.
Referring to my notes.
You did say that divested of corporate investiture, man were God.
And this is true. Man thus divested would be God, would be unindividualized. But he can never be thus divested, at least never will be. Else we must imagine an action of God returning upon itself, a purposeless and futile action. Man is a creature. Creatures are thoughts of God. It is the nature of thought to be irrevocable.
I do not comprehend. You say that man will never put off the body?
I say that he will never be bodiless.
Explain.
There are two bodies, the rudimental and the complete, corresponding with the two conditions of the worm and the butterfly. What we call death is but painful metamorphosis. Our present incarnation is progressive, preparatory, temporary. Our future is perfected, ultimate, immortal. The ultimate life is the full design.
But of the worm's metamorphosis, we are palpably cognizant.
We, certainly, but not the worm. The matter of which our rudimental body is composed is within the ken of the organs of that body, or, more distinctly, our rudimental organs are adapted to the matter of which is formed the rudimental body, but not to that of which the ultimate is composed. The ultimate body thus escapes our rudimental senses, and we perceive only the shell which falls, in decaying, from the inner form, not that inner form itself. But this inner form, as well as the shell, is appreciable by those who have already acquired the ultimate life.
You have often said that the mesmeric state very nearly resembles death. How is this?
When I say that it resembles death, I mean that it resembles the ultimate life. For when I am in trance, the senses of my rudimental life are in abeyance, and I perceive external things directly, without organs, through a medium which I shall employ in the ultimate unorganized life.
Unorganized.
Yes, Organs are contrivances by which the individual is brought into sensible relation with particular classes and forms of matter, to the exclusion of other classes and forms. The organs of man are adapted to his rudimental condition, and to that only. His ultimate condition, being unorganized, is of unlimited comprehension in all points but one, the nature of the volition of God. That is to say, the motion of the unparticled matter. You will have a distinct idea of the ultimate body by conceiving it to be entire brain. This it is not, but a conception of this nature will bring you near a comprehension of what it is. A luminous body imparts vibration to the luminiferous ether. The vibrations generate similar ones within the retina. These again communicate similar ones to the optic nerve. The nerve conveys similar ones to the brain. The brain, also, similar ones to the unparticled matter which permeates it. The motion of this latter is thought, of which perception is the first undulation. This is the mode by which the mind of the rudimental life communicates with the external world. And this external world is, to the rudimental life, limited through the idiosyncrasy of its organs. But in the ultimate unorganized life, the external world reaches the whole body, which is of a substance having affinity to brain, as I have said, with no other intervention than that of an infinitely rarer ether than even the luminiferous. And to this ether, in unison with it, the whole body vibrates, setting in motion the unparticled matter which permeates it. It is to the absence of idiosyncratic organs, therefore, that we must attribute the nearly unlimited perception of the ultimate life. To rudimental beings, organs are the cages necessary to confine them until fledged.
You speak of rudimental beings. Are there other rudimental thinking beings than man?
The multitudinous conglomeration of rare matter into nebulae, planets, suns, and other bodies which are neither nebulae, suns, nor planets, is for the sole purpose of supplying pabulum for the idiosyncrasy of the organs of an infinity of rudimental beings. But for the necessity of the rudimental, prior to the ultimate life, there would have been no body such as these. Each of these is tenanted by a distinct variety of organic, rudimental thinking creatures. In all, the organs vary with the features of the place tenanted. At death, or metamorphosis, these creatures, enjoying the ultimate life, immortality, and cognizance of all secrets but the one, act all things and pass everywhere by mere volition, indwelling, not the stars, which to us seem the sole palpabilities, and for the accommodation of which we blindly deem space created, but that space itself, that infinity of which the truly substantive vastness swallows up the star shadows, blotting them out as non-entities from the perception of the angels.
You say that, but for the necessity of the rudimental life, there would have been no stars. But why is this necessity? But why this necessity?
In the inorganic life, as well as in the inorganic matter generally, there is nothing to impede the action of one simple unique law, the divine volition. With the view of producing impediment, the organic life and matter, complex, substantial, and law-encumbered, were contrived.
But again, why need this impediment have been produced?
The result of law inviolate is perfection, right, negative happiness. The result of law violate is imperfection, wrong, positive pain. Through the impediments afforded by the number, complexity, and substantiality of the laws of organic life and matter, the violation of law is rendered, to a certain extent, practicable. Thus, pain, which in the inorganic life is impossible, is possible in the organic.
But to what good end is pain thus rendered possible?
All things are either good or bad by comparison. A sufficient analysis will show that pleasure, in all cases, is but the contrast of pain. Positive pleasure is a mere idea. To be happy at any one point, we must have suffered at the same. Never to suffer would have been never to have been blessed. But it has been shown that in the inorganic life, pain cannot be thus the necessity for the organic. The pain of the primitive life of earth is the sole basis of the bliss of the ultimate life in heaven.
Still, there is one of your expressions which I find it impossible to comprehend: the truly substantive vastness of infinity.
This, probably, is because you have no sufficiently generic conception of the term substance itself. We must not regard it as a quality, but as a sentiment. It is the perception in thinking beings of the adaptation of matter to their organization. There are many things on the earth which would be nihility to the inhabitants of Venus, many things visible and tangible in Venus, which we could not be brought to appreciate as existing at all. But to the inorganic beings, to the angels, the whole of the unparticled matter is substance. That is to say, the whole of what we term space is to them the truest substantiality. The stars, meantime, through what we consider their materiality, escaping the angelic sense, just in proportion as the unparticled matter, through what we consider its immateriality, eludes the organic.
And then it goes.
As the sleepwalker pronounced these,
Not walk.
as the sleep-waker pronounced these latter words in a feeble tone, I observed on his countenance a singular expression which somewhat alarmed me and induced me to awake him at once. No sooner had I done this than with a bright smile irradiating all his features, he fell back upon his pillow and expired. I noticed that in less than a minute afterwards, his corpse had all the stern rigidity of stone. His brow was of the coldness of ice. Thus, ordinarily, should it have appeared only after long pressure from Azrael's hand, had the sleepwaker indeed, during the latter portion of this discourse, been addressing me from out the region of the shadows.
Okay. This story, published August 1844. Purloined Letter, which I don't think we've done yet, which is one of his key stories about intelligence work, I will also indicate. It's published September 1844. Now, we haven't read the Purloined Letter, but the Purloined Letter is one of several of what are called the Tales of Ratiocination. And it's a story that we aren't going to take up tonight, but is central to the whole understanding of Edgar Poe and his invention of what people call the detective novel or the detective story. No one had written these stories or such stories before Poe. So while we can't say precisely, or maybe somebody could say precisely, I just don't happen to know it, whether he worked on these stories simultaneously, we do know that the publication dates are very close. And I wanted to point that out because we're talking about what people think, but we should also note that all of these seem to be the same sort of consideration. All of these referring to what he does in his stories of detection. Okay, so let me stop there. So let's just ask, what do people think? Is there anything in particular that struck you, or anything that you have questions about, or anything you disagreed with? Because that's the other element here that we should discuss, or anybody at all.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but I think I'll just start by asking about the ether, luminiferous ether he talks about. Was that something that was regarded as just like true? Because I know that that has been, disproven now, but is that something that in his contemporary people thought this is what is in between empty space?
Yeah. There are several things here. For example, Poe also clearly references Newton.
Yeah.
And we would say something different about that. There are other elements in which, if you look at some of the other later writings that he does, or Eureka and so on, he talks very favorably about Laplace and some other things. So there are things that Poe is not right about that he did think, and that people did think at the time. So that's true. Although one thing I would just say about the way he's posing this, even though the ether idea, yes, is disproven, he's posing something from a philosophical standpoint, which is a little bit different. Yes, it is constrained by the wrongness of that idea of that time. That's why I think he also said he always wanted to have Eureka regarded as a poem, not as a scientific work. If you've seen the beginning, the introduction to that work, because he knew that many of the things that were particularly thought were going to be proven to be wrong later.
But he said when he brought up Newton, it was about Newton missed the idea.
Well, why don't you just quote it?
Yeah.
So that way we don't.
He says, a resistance now ascertained, it is true, to exist in some degree, which is, nevertheless, so slight as to have been quite overlooked by the sagacity even of Newton.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, read more.
We can if you want.
No, I was just, I'm not sure what exactly he's referring to in saying that Newton had missed the ether, but I do know that in Newton's work, I think the account that he gives for how things move into heaven is kind of this action at a distance, right? Like that
Yes.
there's just this power and it acts.
Well, yes, but what clearly is going on, I think, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Poe is trying to say something about the issue of the nature of God. I mean, I think obviously as a whole, that's what the discussion is. I mean, obviously, guys, because since Van Kirk is about to die, he's having a conversation with him. He's been doing these conversations over a period of time. The claim is that because of the conversations and the way that it works is that you basically create this empathetic relationship with the person. There are things that you can induce to come out of the person more clearly and with greater frequency that have nothing to do with the limits, the normal limits of the physical perception, right? I mean, that's what's being discussed. So, right, the premise is that he sort of, and he says it at the end, was I talking to him from beyond the grave? Had I figured out a way, or was it the case that actually he was speaking to me from that, the undiscovered country from which no one has returned? Is that what's happened? Right. So that's what that's what he's asking as a question. And he's posing that perhaps that's what we are hearing.
Well, I don't want other people have something to show.
Well, we should do just, I'm sure anybody would interrupt if they got something to say. So if you have something, go ahead, because there may be, and you may also should check the chat, see if there's anything there. But I think the issue involved is obviously, I mean, one of the issues is it's a dialogue And the Poe, or the character called P, let's say it's Poe, keeps asking these questions, which I think are everybody's questions that you would have for somebody saying these things.
So I was reminded about the power of words, also because they take up the same topic, especially this idea about thought being the motivating factor behind action, and that behind all thoughts is God. Although that's the conclusion that they come to in the power of words. And here it's elaborated more, as if they're saying, well, let's actually take that up and, kind of dissect it a little more.
Well, I just have a question about what do people think about what's being discussed also. I mean, there are things that are said here. Do you think these things are right? You think they're not relevant, or what? Like his has this whole idea that thought is material. That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about this. What's this about? All things are either good or bad by comparison. I don't think I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to say something about how this was written, because when you were talking about how mesmerism was this popular form of, I don't know, it sounded like it was some sort of like party trick that people were trying to
Yeah,
perform
it's a
to
big
induce-
fad.
Yeah, to like induce people to say things that they
Mhm.
usually wouldn't say. And so I thought it was pretty, I guess there's a sense of irony that this guy, Ben Kirk, who you said his name means of the church, is this conversation that he's having isn't it's implying that it's something he doesn't usually have until he arrives at his deathbed. So I'm just like curious as like for if this guy is he a priest?
No, it's interesting. It's what this. I'm glad you said that, right? Because if you look at what he says, he lays it out. He says, "I need not tell you how skeptical I have hitherto been on the topic of the soul's immortality." So everything that we're about to hear is like the opposite of what this guy normally says, thinks, right? That's very important. I cannot deny that there has always existed, as if in that very soul which I have been denying, a vague half sentiment of its own existence. But this half sentiment at no time amounted to conviction. With it, my reason had nothing to do. All attempts at logical inquiry resulted indeed in leaving me more skeptical than before. So he said, whenever I try to get at this, I mean, I come back, I'm more convinced than I was before. There's no God. Right? That's what he's saying. That I tried this with Cousin, didn't work. This Charles Ellswood, he said, I got placed in my hand. I read it with profound attention. Throughout, I found it logical, but the portions which were not merely logical were unhappily the initial arguments of the disbelieving hero of the book. In his summing up, it seemed evident to me that the reasoner had not even succeeded in convincing himself. But he's saying that the book is because that's what it's about. It's an atheist, and he meets these Christians, and there's a back and forth. And he's saying, well, the part that's least logical just made me convinced that I was right in the first place. So this stuff has not had any effect on me. So one thing that Poe is clearly doing is he's naming people who are authorities of the time or influentials of the time, right? And saying, well, this stuff really doesn't convince at all. So then the idea is, well, maybe if we do this, something different will happen. He said, let's say here. In short, I was not long in perceiving that if man is to be intellectually convinced of his own immortality, he will never be so convinced by the mere abstractions which have been so long the fashion of the moralists of England, France, and of Germany. So he's talking about people, the so-called the German critical philosophers, for example, some of those who did believe in God and were talking, for example, Hegel's whole thing about absolute spirit. He's one of them. He's several other people that you could name. Abstractions may amuse and exercise, but take no hold upon the mind. Here upon earth, at least, philosophy, I am persuaded, will always in vain call upon us to look upon qualities as things. The will may assent, the soul, the intellect, never. So that's kind of an interesting sentence, right? The will may assent, the soul, the intellect, never. And then lately, there has been a certain deepening of the feeling until it has come so nearly to resemble. He's talking here about the idea of believing. I am enabled to plainly to trace this effect to the mesmeric influence. Okay, so he's saying, but I've begun to believe this, but I think the effect is mesmerism. Okay, so, and with Poe, as I think you're trying to point out, or at least I'll point out based on what you said, you always got to watch it because he's being satirical a lot of the time. He's addressing things in the people at the time, right? Now he may have a point of view, but he's also knows there's a lot of craziness out there, which is what he's saying for a lot of reasons. And so he says, okay, so let's just take this circumstance. And the author says, or rather the Van Kirk says, I cannot better explain my feeling than by the hypothesis that the mesmeric exaltation enables me to perceive a train of convincing ratiocination, a train which in my abnormal existence convinces, but which in full accordance with the mesmeric phenomena does not extend except through its effect into my normal condition. Right? So if I'm in this other state, this makes sense to me. When I come back, I just have the effect. Now, it might be notable to point out that Dante says something a bit similar to this in the Commedia. He makes the point that the poem you're going to read is nothing compared to what he actually experienced, particularly the end in the Paradiso. So there's another possible or another element of what Poe is bringing in here. He says, in sleep waking, the reasoning and its conclusion, the cause and its effect are present together. In my natural state, the cause vanishing, the effect only, and perhaps only partially remains. These considerations, now, this of course is a familiar territory to those who have, particularly in the 1960s and 70s, talked about altered states of consciousness. Now, I'm clearly not, okay, follow me here, right? Because of that, I'll go into whether I agree or disagree. I'm making a different point. This is a question that has often been raised by many about the notion is there a world of ideas which cannot be brought to heel, if you want to put it that way, in language or in experience? I mean, it's a question that has been often raised, and not just raised. There's a lot of like if you look at people like the mathematician Ramanujan, is that how you say his name? Who simply saw these very advanced and beautiful. It's not just mathematical theories or theorems, but he could see these things in his mind. Or the same thing that's discussed by Oliver Sacks, the now deceased psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, where he talks about the twins that were able to sort of savants.
With the abacus, right? And they were able to make prime numbers like even more than the book that he brought.
Because they could see them.
Yeah.
They weren't actually exercising any great deliberation. They simply saw them. Or if matches spilled on the floor, that he did that one time. And they just said 27, 27, 27. Right? and the way he said, they knew how many were on the floor and just held the hand up with the three, right? And what he, and they knew it immediately. But the point was they were not actually counting. They were seeing something. So certainly there are qualities of mind in different expressions that would indicate that the sensorium we use is limited. I mean, I think fundamentally that's what he's saying over and over. Like he makes that point about Venus, and if you're on Venus, there are things you would see. If we were on Venus, there were things we wouldn't see, but Venusians would see them. They would experience them, but we wouldn't, because of the difference in the and that's this point he makes about organs. Did you follow that one?
Well, you know, there's like a sort of mantis ray in the ocean that has more color filters than we do, right? So we can only see like the 3 primary colors, but they can see 6. So they see a world completely different than ours. Whereas like dogs have the inverse, right? Where they can only see like 2 primary colors. So everything for them is more gray than ours, right?
Or well, like what we try to do with things like the Crab Nebula with the different telescopes. That's a good example, right? You have the X-ray.
You have to filter. You have to layer the different.
Right. You have infrared.
Right. In order to actually get color in these images.
Right. Right. So when you're looking at images from the James Webb, for example, or the Hubble, that's not literally what quote is there, but it's something which is a synthesized, conception. So you're getting a conception of a universe that you are not directly seeing in the way in which it's portrayed to you.
Yeah, right.
And you need these multiple kinds of telescopes in the same way you need different, hearing and seeing, for example, completely different. And neither of them is true, but something in between them is true. There's an idea, there's a fabric, as I was saying before.
Right. Or if you think about how Helen Keller was actually.
Why don't you come up? People keep looking at me. I
Oh.
you pull up somebody else.
I was going to say, if you think about this question of self perception and the fact that the sensorium goes way beyond the nominal 5 sentences, which actually doesn't tell you that much. And you look at somebody like think about Helen Keller, and when
people know who that is, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, Helen Keller was a woman that actually she developed as a result of a sickness very young. I think before she was a year old, she became blind and deaf, and therefore she also couldn't speak. And she was through her life is portrayed through a famous movie called The Miracle Worker, which is useful to see. But she had a teacher, Annie Sullivan, who basically taught her to be able to communicate with the world. And she became a major intellectual. She wrote many things. She went to Harvard. She wrote papers and so on. But she describes many, she describes, for example, going up to the Empire State Building and then looking down and seeing the entire city. So she has this perception because of her intellect, but she's actually, in a certain sense, really seeing it. Or she has something else where I forget the singer, if it's Caruso or who,
Yeah,
Caruso, where he's singing and she goes up and feels his face as he's singing. And she says that she can hear him singing. And she can hear the beauty of it through this means. So yeah, there's definitely different the extension of the sensorium, which is also what we're doing with what we're describing with actually, looking at this sort of different pictures that are being sent to us by satellites of space. There was one other thing that this was kind of reminding me of, because many years ago, Diane Sayre and I actually met with this woman. It was sort of a chance meeting we were organizing, and she had a I guess you would say a near death experience. She had fallen on ice. She was a relatively young woman, and she had hit her head and been in a very, very deep coma for a couple of months. I don't remember how long, but it was quite some time. And she described to us this sensation at a certain point of being in the room, and her family was there. And she said it was as if there was a curtain that was up, and she could hear what they were saying, even though she couldn't make out. But she was there in the room with them, but simultaneously not in the room. And she had the perception, for example, that she was in a place. There was another place where she kept saying there was a very, very bright light, and her grandmother was there. And there was a question where she went back and forth with whether or not she wanted to go through this curtain, but she didn't actually want to go there because it wasn't exactly warm or radiant or beautiful, or whether she would just stay where she was or go where this bright light was. And she described how she came out of the coma because at a certain point, I think her daughter, who was 6 years old or something, came into the room and was also talking to her. And she said, I should actually, even though it's like more challenging, it's not as easy as laying here or going to the light, I should come out. And it was at that moment that she woke up. But she had this and she told me at the time that she had read many things about this phenomena of a near-death experience. And many people describe the same kind of thing where they're in this area, which is between two different realms. That's the sense they have. So anyway, it's just there was things in this that clearly are reminiscent of that.
I don't mind telling you, a lot of this was over my head. I'm going to read it again and try to suss it out. But that last paragraph, I got that.
Well, let's read it. Read it again, Jose.
The last paragraph you said?
Yeah.
Sure. As the sleep waker pronounced these latter words in a feeble tone, I observed on his countenance a singular expression, which somewhat alarmed me and induced me to awake him at once. No sooner had I done this than with a bright smile irradiating all his features, he fell back upon his pillow and expired. I noticed that in less than a minute afterward his corpse had all the stern rigidity of stone. His brow was of the coldness of ice. Thus, ordinarily, should it have appeared, only after long pressure from Azrael's hand, had the sleep waker, indeed, during the latter portion of his discourse, been addressing me from out the region of the shadows. Oh, I'm glad we just.
That's the Poe I know. That's the spooky Poe. Yeah. He had died sometime
Before.
beginning of the interrogation, and now he's cold. He
Yeah.
could have been cold, like an hour from now, but now he was almost immediately dead. So was he talking from beyond the grave?
I'd picked up on that too, and I'm glad we reread this because that's the other aspect of this too. That
And Azrael's hand sounds a lot like like Israel.
No, it's the angel of death.
I know, but it's from the
The Muslim.
Muslim and Hebrew tradition. And doesn't Israel mean crossing over? I think isn't that the where the Hebrew comes from? So like you're crossing over. They mean the River Jordan, but
It's also the angel of death.
Life, death.
That's what I think so too, because then it's like, well, when did this guy actually die?
Maybe they have to rename their country.
Take this up. It's not spooky. That's his whole point. It's a very real thing, and may therefore be worth spending time to think about. The realm of ideas is an immortal realm. Actually, one of the things that he says, and it's interesting. Actually, let me just get this thing. I just realized at some point, and there's much in here to be talked about because it should not be skipped over because it doesn't exist in the realm of normal, or rather regularized English language usage. And the very last sections, actually, here it is. P, you say that but for the necessity of the rudimental life, there would have been no stars. But why this necessity? So the answer is, in the inorganic life, as well as in the inorganic matter generally, there is nothing to impede the action of one simple, unique law, the divine volition. With the view of producing impediment, the organic life and matter, complex, substantial, and law encumbered, were contrived. P. But again, why need this impediment have been produced? V. The result of law inviolate is perfection, right, negative happiness. The result of a law violate is imperfection, wrong, positive pain. Through the impediments afforded by the number, complexity, and substantiality of the laws of organic life and matter, the violation of the law is rendered to a certain extent practicable. Thus, pain, which in the inorganic life is impossible in the organic. But to what end is pain thus rendered possible? Yeah. Okay, so there's an issue here that you don't want to act like this wasn't said. To what good end is pain thus rendered possible? And then that's when the question came up that Adrian said. He said, I don't agree with this. All things are either good or bad by comparison, if sufficient now, and it's a passage here. So now I would suggest that we should, well, at least we should make people aware that there's an option here, which I think we can all think about it. Go take a look at St. Augustine's on free choice of the will. Because let me put it like this. If there were no free choice of the will, would there be evil? I'm just going to leave that question.
Answer it.
You can say, go ahead.
I mean, I'm just thinking like an animal doesn't have free will. It's driven by its impulses, its hunger, its need to reproduce. And so when a lion kills a zebra, that's fucked up. But I wouldn't call that evil. It's just hungry, right? And the zebra's, it's prey. Or if a lion eats a person, it doesn't well, maybe the person shouldn't have been there to begin with, but you know.
Okay, I will request that you people should look, anybody that is interested in this sort of thing, and see, are there animal species that torture? Just take a look at it. Okay.
But that's not.
All right. What on? Okay. All right. Right. See, but now check it out. I'm just go look some things up. There's a particular, for example, group of ants. I'm not going to name what they are. Go look them up. They take slaves.
What?
I'm just telling you. Okay. So now this is not the. So I just think so. Let's put that question out there because he's saying something, and again, maybe, and this. I mean, I'll add on to Adrian's objection, not because I don't. It may be able to be refuted, by the way, but well, I mean, he's like talking like British empiricism, you know, philosophic calculus, you know, pleasure pain principle. That's what this sounds like to me.
Yeah.
Negative happiness, right? Positive pain. What is this? Huh? I mean, at least it sounds like that. But if you look at this question of free choice of the will, it's not like you're required to do evil, but if there isn't free will, then is there evil? Now, many dictators in history have raised this question. It's something kind of important to think about, right? You know, like the old line from one of my favorite movies, The Magnificent Seven. He says, you know, your problem is you ask these people to make too many decisions. With me, only one decision. Do what I say. So interesting. I mean, I just think, okay, so, but this is one of the more, I picked it because I thought it might usefully provoke something that we haven't gone into the realm of. You're right that it's very much like the power of words. But it's interesting, right? Because here he says at the very beginning of this exchange with Van Kirk says, you just find the passage here.
You know, the beginning of God.
No, I'm looking for the where he says it's just a middle where spirit's a word.
Oh, it's not God.
There's no immateriality of the mere word.
Right, that's one place. He says a word like truth, beauty, right? He says that also. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we should take this up again. Okay, we'll take it up again next week. Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for coming. And we're pretty much at the end anyway because we've got other things. The last thing I'd just like to do.
Wait, but I'm sorry. I apologize. Man.
No.
Well, but
No,
like this whole, if I understand the beginning correctly, P is the one who's doing these sessions of mesmerism, right?
Right. He's the one.
So he's like a therapist or like a hypnotist. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like what did you say?
Hypnotist. That's what
She said, right? Hypnotist.
analyst said. Like it's like a hypnotist. Okay.
Fun hat for hypnosis. Posted on like a street pole on the way here.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting.
But it,
Hey man, you might.
I'll agree.
yeah, like in the case of him being, it doesn't seem like, but what does he actually do to hypnotize? And it just seems
Well,
like he
right.
like speaks to him in this.
It seems to start in the middle after something has been
Yeah.
done.
Right,
Oh, yeah, 'cause
exactly.
he
It's
says
been
a few passes. I didn't know what he meant by
Yeah.
passes, although Robert kind of motioned like this. Is that what that is?
That maybe.
That was
I
how
think mesmerism was like a specific, like, kind of hokey. trap.
Right. They
Yeah.
some people used hypnosis, and it's true that there are people, I mean, suggestion is there are ways that you can do this. And what's being said about the story is that they were doing this several times. And that what happens supposedly is that there are things you can suggest. That's the other element here. You can suggest to the person in that state, you know, like you do with the hypnosis thing, you know, you tell somebody to say something or walk across the room and this kind of thing. So hypnosis can be involved, but what Poe is trying to, he's really using, frankly, the pretext of the idea of it to have this dialogue about something in which the guy is answering. So that's really what's going on here. Right.
Yeah.
I recently started, I haven't finished it, but the Ghost Seer, I mean, that's the whole, in Schiller's story, that's.
Why don't you come up so they can hear what you're referring to, because it's important
I'll
vis-a-vis Venice and all the things
Yeah.
that we're talking about.
So yeah, we have been going through this theme of Venice with some of the Poe stories, and I just wanted to bring a connection of another story by Friedrich Schiller. I don't know when it was published, like it probably is the late 1700s, but it's a story called The Ghost Seer, which is 1787. It's basically like an unfinished novel, is my understanding. I've read about half of it, but it tells the story of this nobleman who's living in Venice, and he essentially, I don't want to give away the whole plot, but he basically specifically through the intervention of some sort of unseen political forces, he comes to be gripped by the question of whether or not there's such a thing as supernatural forces, and the way that they induce this train of reasoning in his mind is by sort of creating these kind of artificial environments where he is tricked into thinking that he's communicating with the dead, which is the same topic as the story. So I think, like you're saying, Dennis, like it's a pretext. It's kind of it's really the genius of Poe's poetic method, is that the pretext becomes the actual the way that he communicates the most. Like you think, oh, he's just shitting on mesmerism,
right?
And then he has something real to say, but everything he's saying has a positive quality. And I think that was, I mean, this idea of mesmerism, the thing I was thinking about the whole time is television, because I spent, I mean, like in the household I grew up in, I mean, I would come home from school, and it was not like there was hardly a social fabric there. I would come home, I would sit in front of a television for 4 or 5 hours, literally mesmerized. So I think my guess would be that when with this whole thing at the beginning, where the story is taking place sort of in the world where mesmerism has become an unquestioned part of life. I think he already saw that happening with the literature of the day, but then he uses that to actually raise to make a poetic argument about how you could see the conundrum of life as having. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it seems to me that what he's saying about the dissociation of mesmerism, it seems like he's trying to account for that as a perversion of something true, as opposed to just a trick or something like that. Because
well, you actually hit something very interesting, right? Because you said, well, I was mesmerized in front of the television.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So in modern culture, this story is perfect, because people are mesmerized in front of 1, 2, multiple screens. We now live in a situation where people carry screens with them
to the bathroom. I mean, it's like that's like the whole, that's like the comedian thing.
Yeah, right. It's always with you.
Yeah.
The screen is always with you. See, it's not, oh, I have no, but it's a screen. Why are you carrying a screen? So, well, you have to have the screen to get. Of course, I know that, but how did this happen? Why is it a cultural artifact? Why is it a presumption? Actually, 30 years ago, it was not a presumption. It is now a presumption.
Right, and I think the inverse of that is at the end of the story, it's like, I was wondering whether or not I was really speaking with someone who is dead, but this document is a I mean, it is the physical manifestation of the motion of Poe's mind as he intentionally organized it, right? So like that this is the thing that's supposedly spooky is just the most basic reality of what we don't take for granted in our culture.
Well, let's make is this off?
Oh, the audio's still going. I just gotta replace the battery.
Oh,
They can still
okay.
hear you.
Audio's still going. Okay, well, let's do it then. Then if you replace the battery, can we play the Bach anyway? Is that possible?
Yeah, we can. I have to.
We can do that. Okay, let me just say something about what I want to sort of the conclusion. We'll conclude with, well, although actually the video is good because it shows the score. Not that people can read the score.
No, they'll be able to see the video of the score.
Oh, okay,
They
great.
just can't see us right now.
Oh, they can't see us. Okay,
They
great.
can
But
hear
that's
us.
fine. So, want to play. This is the Bach wrote a set of what he called inventions, 2 and 3 voiced inventions. You'll see these published as 2 or 3 part inventions, but I always like to say voiced because it's all of Bach is vocal. It's rendered by instruments, but it's all vocal. Remember that Bach every week wrote a new cantata which is a piece which has several parts, usually 7 to 8 parts, for the church, St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. So that was every week, every Sunday. He had to have a new one, and composed at least 300 of them. Some are lost also, but that's known that he did that. So whenever you're looking at one of his instrumental pieces, it's the same thing. This is the 3-part invention in C minor. You'll be able to see the score. People can read it, but also you can follow the motion of it. In any case, and it is a way of just sort of pointing to what was just said, which is, okay, well, here's the composition, which itself inverts and undermines the question that's asked at the end of the composition. Because the composition is clearly real, indicates that is the story, Mesmeric Revelation. So we'll play this from Bach. It's a couple minutes. And I just play it because now that we've gone through this 3-part dialogue, which was the 2 speakers and the narrator, it's probably useful to hear it because the motion is what's important, not the speakers, as is true also in this dialogue. It's not that we took up a lot of particulars. We should have done that. But it's the motion from the beginning through its conclusion. And like with a lot of the Bach compositions, they move until they don't have to move anymore because they're completed. And it's always a question, why? Why is it complete there? How come it didn't complete 5 measures earlier? Right? Well, how does Bach know when he's completed? What gives you a sense that it's completed? Why? What makes sense that it began, it stopped at a certain point? Why? It doesn't have fade outs, for example. Bach never uses fade outs, right? People are used to that in kind of modern music, something which just stops playing at a certain point, but you're just turning the volume down artificially, right? It's turned down in the recording. He never uses that. He has a conclusion. Why? How? So we'll play this. Okay.
Figures are in there.
Yep, that's it. All right.
Okay, that's it.